It's the very best of Rennie and Webster's World of Sport here on TalkSport2. We don't pay Mark Webster enough to do these idents, so I'm doing them because I will work for food. It's not a live show, so don't text or call in. We're back with you every weekday, 10 till 12. Here's the best bits. It is Rennie and Webster's World of Sport here on TalkSport2. The star of the Major League film franchise, Mark, Tom Berenger, we were looking for. Tom Berenger.
Yes.
That would have taken me all day, that. Without the internet, I would have had a nervous breakdown this afternoon trying to think of that. And definitely watch both those movies. They're brilliant. I watched one literally a month and a half ago. They're on Netflix right now. Great way to spend the afternoon.
Me that I can't remember Costner's. There was it definitely trilogy.
Field of Dreams, definitely.
Bull Durham.
Yes. Waterworld, he plays baseball, doesn't he?
Yes, that's mainly baseball based.
It's basically Waterworld is what they call the World Series when
exactly
it's underwater.
Right, that's right. I mean,
it's an amphibious World Series.
Running the bases was a tougher one from ship to ship, but they gave it a go. That was the exciting thing about it. A dystopian future in which only people who look like fish will now play baseball.
Didn't that just win the Oscar?
I certainly should have done.
The Shape of Water.
I'm making a note of that. The Shape of Water.
Well, it's lucky we're talking about movies today, isn't it?
Funny that.
Let's do a professional segue. Because
Go on, Tom, do
there's
this
a
thing.
brand new movie coming out in the next couple of months called Red Army Hooligans. It is by the makers of several other movies you may well have seen, including Essex Boys' Law of Survival and Hooligans at War North vs. South. We are joined by the director of the movie, Stephen M. Smith. How are you, mate? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Morning to you.
Steve, you've luckily turned up in London today. It's worked out great for us.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about the movie?
Well, the movie is focusing on the Russian World Cup and how hooligans have to try and organise kind of fights and things maybe over here instead of being actually in Russia. So
it's our hooligans, as in English hooligans.
Well, the Russians come over here. Yeah, the Russians come over here.
And in a sort of entente cordiale kind of way.
Yeah, but they kind of organise football matches and there's betting syndicates and boxing matches and things like that. But there's a heartbeat to the story which revolves around a particular hooligan who's from an older generation, more of the kind of the old-fashioned kind of hooligans from the 80s, and he has a head injury. So it's kind of got a heartbeat to it, a drama. He's not really sure what happened to him, and it kind of follows his story, and it's a journey of redemption and so-called kind of really understanding what this is all about with hooliganism and stuff like that.
Now, I think it's interesting to talk about this film in context of, you mentioned the Essex Boys there, and there is, it's a lot of people who won't necessarily be aware that there is this kind of, it's a genre or a cottage industry world that has built up around, I suppose, one idea, which was that original Essex Boys idea, and it seems to have flourished into as I say, like a sort of mini film industry.
Well, yeah, I think Essex Boys has been told a lot of times. Our story took away. It was kind of different to what the other stories were, and I think there is a fascination with us having conflict with other nations, and it goes back to things like It's a Knockout, where you would watch something and have a laugh. And I think you've had that generation where people would go to football. It would be a way, if you ever watch any of these kind of hooligan things from years ago, they would go there and have a laugh, have a fight, and that was their weekend. Now people don't do that. I think people have got more interest, more output, more things to do at the weekend. And I think now people are interested in still seeing conflict. And I think that's the thing. It's about, well, actually, are we better than Russia? I mean, after the recent things that have been going on with Putin and the horrible attack, we still have this in our human beings, as human beings, to say, well, actually, we're bigger than you, we're better than you. And I think that really is what the core is when it comes to football, supporting your team. You all have a heart, and then, of course, you have this crowd mentality.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, my question, I suppose, will be where you kind of come from as a filmmaker when you look at at people who essentially are, as Mark described it, a cottage industry revolving around other sports and getting involved in physical confrontation. Because, I mean, my dad's generation are probably 10, 15 years older than Mark is. And when you go out with them to West Ham games, they always talk about the glory days of when this happened, when that happened, when we got into a rumble here, when he got punched there.
The romanticising of it is part of it, isn't it?
It does make me uncomfortable. Like, it makes me feel uncomfortable. And I always say to them, I mean, technically, sort of joking, but not really, you lot ruined football, and that's why it's like this now, because of all the punch-ups you had.
Well,
Do you know what I mean?
I don't think that everybody went to a football match to have a punch-up.
Sure not. Yeah, absolutely.
I think there was atmosphere created by having stand-in areas, and, you know, West Ham's ground especially, you know, you'd have this huge amount of supporters in there. But I think the issue was that it's very much like, well, you did this to me last week, I'm going to do this to you next match. And that's how it started.
Yeah.
So you kind of got these little incidents. And nowadays, you can't do that because you can have a very small incident. It's blown out of proportion. Everyone knows about it. It happens very quickly. In the past, it would take weeks for that information to filter up north and then weeks for it to filter back to the south. So you'd go, well, next match, we're all going to go down there and have a fight and pick on people, right? So I think it also created an atmosphere because you had, I mean, recently West Ham had their last game at the Balloon Ground against Manchester United. And obviously there was quite a lot of atmosphere, but there was huge incidents outside.
Yeah,
I think
telling me.
yeah, you're always going to get incidents at football matches in and around and outside, no matter what you do.
It strikes me as well, these kind of films, you know, if you go back to, say, Green Street, I don't know, it would have started before that, The Firm, I get, you know. So there's this subgenre of hooligan films. The thing about it for me is I've always seen them in the same light that you'd watch a Stallone film or a Schwarzenegger film, is that the fact, of course, no one... It's like the Expendables.
It's escapism.
Yeah, exactly. It's heightened versions of reality, isn't it?
That's right.
And not to be taken seriously, because, I mean, you don't watch the Expendables assuming that they're going to go out the following day and pick up a rocket launcher.
Yeah, that's right. You're not.
In the same way, do you think people, that's how they like to watch
I think
these
that a lot
films?
of people like to escape from reality, and I think this way they get to also reminisce about things. I mean, I tend to try to make my films more of have a story and a heartbeat. They're more about the drama of an individual within the situation. But I think there's a lot of people who would like to be able to get away with some of the things that happen in a lot of these gangster films.
Exactly. Guy Ritchie's stuff. Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go down the pub and start a fight, or they're going to go to the football match and do something bad. But people do. They get carried away with the emotion. We talked about this with the new technology and how the emotion is being left and gone because it slows the game down. Emotion in a football match is part of the crowd. The players feed it as well. They're fed by emotion, which is why when you get World Cups, they can sometimes be sterile because 50% of the audience is paid to be there virtually because, you know, they're not real, genuine fans. They're people who are corporate. So you've probably had these conversations before. So when you get a derby match, they're usually the best kind of atmospheres that you can get. And I think even in Germany, you know, German football is kind of like they're the team. That's who we should be looking at because they have standing areas that are and it creates atmosphere. But they don't have any trouble. They have trouble outside. They have normal trouble.
But there's trouble outside, irrespective, isn't there? There's always going to be.
But no one's clearly thought the song sheet option was so exciting that Manchester United have found a way to actually sort of bypass all of this physical nature and just basically give us a song to rally behind.
The whole thing was being frustrated about not knowing the words.
That's right. That was it. That's right. It's not being able to express yourself through song has always been the massive problem. I love the fact, I mean, because what you tend to hear, there'll be a perennial argument, particularly when a British film does well, is that the industry's on its knees. But there's this world again that you kind of work in. It kind of, you can bypass issues of where the British film industry is saying we are fair to middling, we're excellent, we're very poor at the moment, because it's a different kind of filmmaking, is it, to a certain extent?
I mean, there's a divide in everything that we do in this country now. You're either super rich or you're super poor. And I think the thing is, I'm making micro-budget movies, so I make 4 to 6 movies a year. And they're all aimed at DVD and digital, which is the DVD will be gone within 5-10 years. And everything is downloadable. Everything is, like as your, podcasts and digital aid. So the budgets are smaller for these films. I mean, the budget for this was non-existent, so...
You crowdfunded a fair amount of this, did you?
Well, no, only a very small fraction.
Right, okay.
So the crowdfunding things are more about us creating publicity.
Right, okay.
I also have a team of... I have a group of guys that I've built up over the last 15 years who regularly put money into my films, but they want little bits and little things, credits and things like that. But it all helps. It also boosts our, fan base. But I would say that things like, going on your show and stuff like that is brilliant for us. And I think the film industry isn't dead. The film industry is thriving. I have so many people who are making films. I think there's actually probably too many films.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Smaller budgets, but more movies.
Yeah,
more movies.
More possibility to make them.
A lack of space to sell them.
Right.
But there's more opportunities online to sell them. So people come to me all the time and go, well, how do I make a movie, Steve? I said, well, just go and make a movie. You can buy a camera, very cheap, very 4K, learn yourself. Then you use your freedom to create something.
But remove the idea of 47 trailers and makeup trucks and
become
rings of
more
lighting. You aren't Pinewood, and don't think that's the only way you have to do it.
Even us, we would have one makeup person, one sound person, one camera guy. It's very small. But it's great having a small team. And when we're off to shoot, I'm shooting 3 movies back to back in June and July, and we're doing it at more or less one location in Devon. And they're horror films, so they're completely different to what we're doing now. But when we do our hooligan films or gangster films, we tend to keep them in London or the surrounding areas because it's much easier. It's much more. There's more people.
To go back to Red Army Hooligans, there's something everyone's kind of worried about, and that is what it's going to be like for English fans going
what's
to
it
Russia.
actually going to be
because
like?
There's always a lot of hysteria about these sorts of things, and there's some of the things that we saw in Marseille. They didn't come across great, certainly in pictures, and there's lots of fairly awful stories from certain individuals, but then it's not an en masse thing. There's maybe, there's a few hundred people that got into some quite big trouble over there. So from what you've learned from making this movie, are people right to be overly concerned? I mean, I'm still considering going to Moscow as a fan, but I'm still on the fence about it because
it's the same as anything. I mean, if you plan to go to a football match in London and you're a Tottenham fan, you're going to Arsenal, are you going to go to an Arsenal pub? Are you going to go to somewhere that may you are a target?
Have you got colour? Oh, you're wearing your colours.
I think you know what I mean. It's kind of like, well, you shouldn't really be afraid to go anywhere in the world, do anything. But I think if you become a target, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, or you're in an area that is going to, well, actually, we all know that there's 300 English fans in that pub. And the Russians will know. If we know, the Russians will know.
Yeah.
So, and with social media today, something can be organised in 5 minutes. So, I think the things that happened in Marseille are to do, again, hooliganism seems to happen in warm weather. You seem to see a lot of them in shorts.
Oh, they may have nailed this one then.
So I think this might be the idea that they're having it in Russia. The other thing is also in Russia, the distances between the
that's true. Yeah,
between
it's a lot
stadiums.
of hard work to be a troublemaker. This one, isn't it? Yeah.
It's going to cost you a bit of money if you want to have a fight in all of the
I like that. That's a much more pragmatic. That's removing all the emotion from it, isn't it? Going, the distance to create trouble between that crowd and that crowd is much too much.
But
for
it's
me
true.
To bear.
It's a psychological thing. I think a lot of people will get up in the morning and go, "Well, do I want to go out today? No, it's raining. I won't." So you tend to have that situation. Well, the sun's out. What are we going to do? We'll have a drink. Oh, now we're drunk. What do we do?
I wonder what follows that. Yeah.
But when you get punched in the face and it's cold, it's actually better. So swings around.
Well, it certainly numbs you to a great extent. That's right. Yeah. Punch me, Steve. I'm freezing.
I think the most frightening thing about Marseille was that there was fights inside the ground.
Right.
Which was disappointing considering the amount of security they had. Now I have never been to Russia to see a football match, but I know that they will be strict.
Certain draconian approach you imagine.
They may not, if you're being Larry, which I would go back to an 80s kind of hooligan word, then they may just come in heavy-handed.
Steve, we're nearly out of time here, mate. Can you tell us when the movie comes out, when we can see it, and where you're planning to distribute the film?
Right, okay, so it's 28th of May in the UK. It's going to be June in America. And it's on DVD. It's going to be in Asda. and it's going to be in HMV, and it will be on all the digital platforms.
I do like the idea. The American idea, of course. The bit you haven't mentioned, of course, this is the international float, because of the amount of expats that would sort of like buy into the. It's kind of the other end of Four Weddings and a Funeral, isn't it? Or Notting Hill. Very much the other end.
Did you know that the Essex Boys films in America are called Gangster Playboys? Now, that doesn't sound very good, does it?
No.
So Essex Boys does seem to go.
That's what we could sub-call this show.
Yeah, I actually thought that's
Rennie and Webster, Gangster Playboys.
I thought Essex was medieval for Gangster Playboys. I actually thought it was an old Viking term. Oh, there you go.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because when I was away 10 years ago or so for like a year, and Green Street came out as a movie, terrible movie, didn't enjoy it. Really embarrassed me, I think, a lot as a West Ham fan. But when you'd be like, I'm a West Ham fan in America, they'd be like, oh, Elijah Wood.
Yeah.
Green Street, is it?
It's true.
They knew what it was.
Well, the other thing I should just mention is that there are other films that get released and they say they might be hooligan films, but they're not. So you tend to have this situation where everyone jumps on the bandwagon. I think at the moment a lot of the distributors, a lot of the shops are very wary because of what's been happening with Russia. But you know, as I say, my film, even though it says Red Army Hooligans on it, it's more of a drama with hooliganism as a background story.
Fair dues.
Would you rather it wasn't in the title? In the English version of it?
I think it has to be in the title for us as a business, you know, and also it appeals. If it didn't have the word hooligan in the film title, it probably wouldn't get sold.
It's why you know, I'm so glad I was born in Gangster Playboy land, as I believe all of us were.
Stephen, thanks for your time, mate. Really
Brilliant.
appreciate
Cheers,
it. Stephen M. Smith, the director of Red Army Hooligans, coming out later this year. You're listening to Rennie and Webster's World of Sport on TalkSport 2.